All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Public AI seminar. It is my great pleasure and honor to have Teri and Taylor Joe joining us from the Economic Security Project. Uh, Teri is the Director of Economic Security California, and Taylor Joe is the Executive Director, and they together, along with many members of their team at the Economic Security Project, have been working on, well, obviously things related to economic security, but more specifically, in the AI space on a project or initiative called CalCompute, which we will hear from Teri and Taylor Joe about very shortly. Um, well, I think I'll just let them take it off from here. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting discussion around what's going on in the context of public AI in California and how we could take it forward. And maybe it'll sort of transition into a conversation about, in the context of this seminar, what all the artists and creative industries in California, how they are perhaps going to be playing a role in the future of some of these initiatives. Let you take it away.
Great. So I'm going to share some slides. First of all, it's great to be in conversation with all of you. I'm going to situate us a little bit in kind of our big picture. Do you guys see something? It's showing a black screen to me. Do you guys see a slide?
Working on it, but not yet.
Okay, hold on. Let me try again. Let's see here. That didn't work again, did it?
No, that's weird. I've never seen that before.
Okay, Teri, do you mind trying to share?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Let me try to share mine.
Not sure why it's not working. So while she's working on that, so I'm going to situate us a little bit in the big picture of how we think about this problem and opportunity, and then I'm going to pass it to Teri to dive in more specifically into our journey on CalCompute. So let's see if we're lucky.
I'm trying presenter view. Hold on. Let's see what I can do. Screens. Oh.
There we go.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Great. Perfect.
Okay, so context on where we come at this as the Economic Security Project. Next slide, Teri. So our vision and mission as an organization, we are committed to building an economy that works for all of us, and where individuals have the freedom and stability required to lead dignified lives. We do research, policy work, culture, narrative work, campaigning work, all kind of oriented towards that goal and vision that it is possible for everyone to thrive in an economy that we can build. So why are we here at a conversation talking about tech? Next slide. A few years ago, it became clear to us as a team, as an organization, that any vision on how to deliver a promise, on that promise of an economy that works for all of us, would require a deeper understanding of the direction of technology and its implications for economic growth and distribution. There are a lot of different flavors to this conversation over the last 2 decades. A lot of us probably remember about a decade ago where there was a lot of conversation around job displacement and automation, something that we're seeing a reinvigoration of right now. There was also, a wave of conversation really focusing on how recent technological advancements with the internet have actually had an accelerating impact on inequality and concentration and accumulation of capital into the hands of a few. There are tremendous impacts on how technology has played out on regional economies, alongside the sheer size the tech sector has on our stock market. And it's also just historically founded. Some of those of you might be familiar with the book Power and Progress, which I think was a good anchor for this moment, that shows that how we have responded to technological shifts throughout time have really played a significant role in what progress looks like and to benefits. Next slide. So we really set out to aim to grow the conversation about the intersection of political economy and AI over the last few years, particularly because we do believe that how we respond to this moment will shape the contours of the next century. It is not just about questions of access and who benefits downstream from the technology. It is really about the future distribution of wealth, power, and decision-making in our economy and our democracy. And so we felt it was really important for organizations and people who are thinking about the economy to be a part of the conversation about where AI is going and the tools that we have. So how does that translate? Next slide. What levers do we have? So before diving into some of what our thinking is on that, I did want to share some of our priors as an organization. What are our beliefs that shape how we've approached this problem? First, we believe that you can build competitive, dynamic, and fair markets that actually solve real-world problems and don't leave people behind. Doing that requires state capacity and government taking an active hand in shaping markets. Markets are not free. They are shaped. The question is by who and to what ends. We generally take the viewpoint that concentrated economic power is not a good thing for democracies or economies, both in terms of stifling innovation, but again, also ensuring broad-based prosperity and distribution of wealth throughout the economy. And then again, how do we get this right? How we respond to this technological moment could lead to AI being a great equalizer in the 21st century. But we also, as an organization, don't believe we're currently on that path right now with the direction of the technology and how it's taking shape. So those are all our priors, which I think are important to name because we may not all agree on the call. And so it's, I think, important to put those at the forefront in terms of how we then move forward. Next slide. So when we think about the tools that we have, what are the levers we have to shape markets? We think a lot about these tools, again, with the kind of goal of making sure there's broad benefit to the public good. Oh, Teri, we just dropped on the slide.
Whoops. Sorry about that.
So one, I think I'm sure a lot of you guys have had conversations around the role of governance. What are the inputs and points of decision making that different folks have? Regulation is another point of intervention. Enforcement, which often can be missing from these conversations, specifically around antitrust, but also broader enforcement of bad actors. It's actually a really powerful tool in incentivizing behavior in markets and something that we have focused a lot on. Public investment, which probably is one that's the most familiar to folks. And then also public options, which is the government actually running or implementing a piece of the tech sector or the AI stack or any part of the economy. Sorry, Teri, the next slide's kind of important to walk people through, so I'll take a second.
Okay, give me one sec. It was working, and then it just like went weird. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can do that again. Oh, here. Yep, there we go.
Perfect. So, these are tools. These tools are not good or bad on their own. It often is a question of how they're deployed and to what ends, and again, clearly what goals. And we're already seeing a lot of these tools be deployed right now around in different parts of the AI stack. So late last year, we co-hosted a workshop with Vanderbilt Policy Accelerator and Mozilla on designing public AI that was really, again, diving into these bigger questions around the political economy and AI. And coming out of that, they put together a paper essentially looking at a taxonomy of what's already taking shape on public AI from a political economy lens across the world. They did 10 case studies of different global examples of how people were taking these different tools and deploying them in different ways together. They identified four primary vehicles: outsourced provision, which is largely like turning to a private sector actor, having a contract with them to supply, again, any part of the AI stack to government to provide some sort of public benefit. Network collaboration, which often takes the form of government moving resources to research institutions and networked organizations to deploy. State corporate fusion. This is like the UAE China model in which you have both corporate and state actors working closely together, and then public options. And I think what's important to think about all of these and how they're deployed either together or differently or separately have real implications for how we're building state capacity, whether government is becoming more or less dependent on existing institutional and private actors, whether we're entrenching dominant corporate players, and then again, whether we're actually alleviating or deepening economic inequality. Next slide. So our take and kind of thinking on this as an organization was that there was an opportunity in California for us to not just wait to see what happens on the political economy today, but try to take an active hand in shaping it, both deploying public imagination and political muscle to get it done. A lot of AI policymaking, again, as this group's probably super familiar, is happening in Brussels, in DC, and of course in Sacramento. And because we had a work happening in California, we thought we could jump in and take a lead on some of this. And so today we're going to talk about, we're doing a work on a few different fronts, but today we really wanted to focus on Cal Compute, which is a public option for compute for the state of California. My colleague Teri has been working on this for the past 2 years, so I'm going to pass it to her to talk about what is it, what have we learned, and what are the implications for the way forward in terms of shaping AI to benefit us all. And with that, Teri, to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about Cal Compute, and then probably even more excited to hear from you all about sort of what you think of when you think about a public AI and a public compute. Because I'll say at the outset that there is a lot with Cal Compute that is TBD, and so I'll get into a little bit of like how we got involved, what the campaign looked like, and sort of where we are right now. But I think it's just fair to say from the start that this is a kind of a work in progress, and it can look a lot of different ways. And I think there's opportunity for all of us to kind of graft our hopes and dreams onto this. So I'm excited to hear about yours. So as Taylor Jo was saying, we're kind of walking around this idea of what it would look like as one of our tools to sort of address some of the the concentration in tech and the concentration in AI. And one of the more sort of like, in addition to obviously enforcing regulations and creating new ones, investing public dollars into providing parts of AI or parts of tech that are particularly resource intensive and have high barrier to entry was one of the more sort of like positive looking things, and felt like something people could get behind. And of course, as Taylor Jo was saying, this, we were seeing this bubbling up all around the world, and even as close to home as in New York. So around that time, one of our, state lawmakers, a real leader on taking on hard issues that take years to accomplish, and actually my hometown Senator Scott Wiener in San Francisco, put out early on, kind of like staked out some ground, like even before the legislative session started. This is in fall of 2023, basically saying two things. One, we think there are some real risks that are coming from AI that we need to think about and address. And the state has just as an important role in doing that as the federal government would. And we're not really going to wait around for the federal government to act anyway. And second, another piece of this is that we need to be investing state resources into enhancing our opportunities in AI and making them more accessible to not just, again, the most sort of like dominant entrenched players. So that was sort of the genesis of Cal Compute. And again, Senator Wiener's a real leader in many ways, and has some positional power as well. And so we reached out to him and said, hey, this is like, we've been working on this. He was familiar with the Vanderbilt work. We had actually had Ganesh do a presentation to him. And so there was like, sort of like this was all bubbling up, if you will. And so we said, this is something that's really like right in our wheelhouse and we'd love to work on. Let's talk about it. Let's work together. Because it was just like this idea, right? It was a spot bill. And so we started to work with Senator Wiener's office and started to do the like due diligence of putting together a policy. And it was like, it was like blank page time, right? Like you're looking at this, piece of paper and you're like, how should we write up this idea and into legislative language? And so I feel like that's even just like from the jump, one of the important lessons is that, thinking about how to construct something like this, like we have really, the muscle of doing that has quite atrophied in our, sort of in at least in the United States, the idea of like, how do you actually write the notion of like creating a state funded, state run, investment in like a thing that is actually going to kind of come into being in real life. So that was actually one of like sort of the initial lessons. But we cobbled together, a basic idea around that, kind of put together what we could figure out from Empire AI, which was just coming into being and also didn't have a lot of like words on the page quite yet, as well as some lessons from the Stem Cell Institute that we have here in California, which was established initially through legislation, but then through ballot measures and stuff. So we, actually put together just some ideas around like, how do you construct this? What's the governance? Who decides? What the use cases are, and it's obviously going to be a finite resource, et cetera, et cetera. And so we started to kind of put pen to paper through the early part of the legislative, the early part of the legislative cycle. So let me talk a little bit about 1047, because it's impossible to talk about Cal Compute without talking about the broader construct of the bill that it lived in. As I mentioned, the other half of the bill, half is probably not, it probably should say way more than half, but the other part of the bill was a set of pre-deployment safety guidelines for or requirements for large model developers. So probably most of you on this call are familiar with this, because it actually ended up becoming quite a massive campaign and a international sensation, I think is what I was often calling it. So that was the part of the bill that I would say drew the most attention. But I think one of the things that felt important, and we got this question a lot, especially early on, which is like, why is Economic Security Project working on this bill? What are you doing here? Like, you don't work on AI safety. Like, this feels like really kind of sort of outside of your wheelhouse. And as people know, there's a little bit of a tastes great, less filling debate in the space between sort of future risk and current risk. I think people call it like safety and ethics. But I would say from our perspective, and this kind of goes a little back to touches back on some of the things Taylor Joe was saying about how we approach issues. From our perspective, we really have deep concerns about the level of concentration in tech and feel like AI is sort of is not new, but is a new chapter in an old book on an old bookshelf around corporate concentration. And that the biggest, if you pull back, and really kind of squint at it, the biggest problem is that tech has kind of run out in front over the last during a time of very lax and like lack of interest in enforcing against concentration and thinking about concentration as a bad thing. Tech has been able to sort of like really run out ahead and like stake the ground and establish themselves as the sort of norm. And so therefore any opportunity, any interest in trying to like, nip at the heels at all or just constrain their ability to do whatever they want has been met with a lot of forceful pushback. They've amassed obviously a lot of money, also a lot of power, and just also sort of this sense of like, well, this is just the way that it is now. And that's true across, AI, that's true across social media norms and rules. It's true across, a number of other areas. And so for us, there was this real like kind of opportunity to work on something that was very profound. And even though it was controversial, it had this through line of like, wait a minute. So you're saying that like there should be literally zero expectations that the creators of some of maybe the most powerful like products, if you will, but some of the most powerful systems in the history of the world, that there should be literally no expectation that you're gonna see if they're not going to pose the risk of like broad scale societal harm. And that just felt very like, what? That just didn't seem right, and was felt very squarely in our kind of construct that we as the public through our elected lawmakers should actually have some say as to what this technology brings in our lives, whom it benefits, and how it serves us and not the other way around. So anyway, so that's how we became comfortable with working on something that was, arguably a little bit outside of our scope. So that that was the our entry point, and then the bill and the campaign had a couple of phases, I would say, and I think this is actually interesting for thinking about just AI policymaking in general. I would say, at least in California, the first phase was sort of getting your heads around it. Like, there was a lot of learning. There were 60 plus AI bills when we started the session. And legislators were just trying to understand what this was. Like, we had, like little diagrams of like the stack just to explain like the basics of AI. And I think also legislators approached the issue from their vantage point. It was sort of like the blindfolded in the elephant, where, if you had some familiarity with ChatGPT, or you had some familiarity with a chatbot on your, like bank account or something, that's what people thought of as AI. And so understanding and getting everyone kind of leveled up to what AI was and what its possibilities were was like a big part of the the initial conversation. And then also there's a winnowing precision aspect to that as well, which is to say, oh, I know you're worried about deep fakes, but this bill isn't about that. Or I know you're worried about this other thing, but this bill isn't about that. And so that's sort of, I think, important to think about as policymaking, is there's sort of this like divergent, convergent part of the first part of the legislative process. Then I would say the other really big observation about this about the bill and the campaign and CalCompute in general is that there was just broad receptivity in the legislature. Like, they felt like they were on board. They're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, CalCompute was the cuddly part, the safety part was actually controversial. But there was a lot of receptivity overall around like, yep, this makes sense. And it wasn't just because Senator Wiener has a leadership role and there's a lot of trust there. It also was this sense that, you're right, we do need to be doing something about this. And this seems sound. And there was this sort of the shadow, or the long shadow of having not acted on social media 15 years ago, that I think legislators, that really landed with resonators. So legislators, even though this didn't address that problem per se, there was a sense that like, yeah, actually it is our job as policymakers to be proactive about what tech will be in our lives. And I think it's no accident that a lot of the legislators actually have children in the like vulnerable age group that social media, we're now seeing sort of these harms. And so it was very easy for legislators to think about like, oh yeah, had someone acted 15 years ago, we might not be in the pickle we're in right now. So I feel like that is another like phase in the campaign that felt important. And then, finally, if anyone who's following this knows, it became a, sort of a massive campaign toward the end. We made the bill got all the way through the legislature, a bit of a photo finish at the end there. And then there was the month period where the governor has to decide whether or not to sign it. And I think from the beginning, we all knew the governor was the biggest hurdle. And, both because he is, kind of aligned with tech in general. He sees tech in California as, the goose that lays the golden eggs. And so that I think was always going to be a bit of an uphill battle. And, but we also thought there was probably like a 10% chance, like a 10% or 10% of his brain that was, genuinely worried about, sort of the future of tech and wants to have a legacy of doing the right thing on tech. And so, we thought there was a chance. However, when Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, who's the governor's mentor, longtime mentor, when they came out in opposition to the bill, it felt unlikely that we were going to prevail. So in the end, as people know, the governor vetoed the bill, but in his veto message, there was nothing critical at all about CalCompute or about the whistleblower protections. And so after we, licked our wounds a little bit, we came back and actually started a new campaign this year with a bill that is just CalCompute and expansion of whistleblower protections. And so we have SB 53, which I will say is right now sailing through the legislature. In his last committee, it was actually on the consent calendar, which meant there was no opposition. So that's like a crazy world compared to, a year ago. So I'd say, where we are now, and then the other couple of things that have happened since then is that we have a government efficiency commission in California poorly named, called the Little Hoover Commission. But late last fall, the Little Hoover Commission issued a pretty lengthy report on AI in California. And its first recommendation was actually basically CalCompute. It said, yep, what we'd like to do, what we should be doing here is having a state-run and operated public computing, cloud computing cluster, and listed a whole set of reasons that were really aligned with ours, which is like, this is about democratizing access. This is about startups having the ability to get in where, in something that isn't appealing to the current dominant players. This is about the state having an opportunity to expand research, et cetera. So this was very exciting kind of like, little boost for our campaign. And I would say that's continued to sort of spur us forward. The place where we have some challenges and where we are now, and I'll just jump to this next piece, is that, some of the things that were hard from the start are still hard. Number one, there's not a natural like funding source. So the bill, the way it's written, is a very light touch bill in that it only establishes the consortium that would establish CalCompute. So it doesn't like say, we'd like $500 million, please, so that we can set this up. It actually is priced out at like, I don't know, I think it's like the top end is like $7.5 million, which would just be to like, bring people into a room and figure out the particulars of CalCompute. So that's one of the challenges, is that it's like very stepwise. And so it would still take a while before this would, before you'd actually see cloud computing. And the ongoing funding is very much in the air, especially in, the current kind of budget situation. So we definitely would need to identify a funding source. I'd say one of, the upside is that as we've socialized, continue to socialize this, we've attracted more interest. So the UC system is very interested in this, and actually it had already like written up a paper as to how they wanted to approach public compute. And so we were, we're looking to continue to have conversations with them. And, we just think that like with the, continued popularity of this and the momentum that we have, there are a lot of opportunities to engage with people like all of these folks on the call and others who can start to flesh out, first of all, what it, can and should look like. And then also, very importantly, how we would fund such a thing going forward. So, let me, I think, stop there and see what kind of questions people have. And I realize I'm on a little screen, and so I'm seeing that there are people throwing things in the chat, but I have not been able to read them. So we can, I think, jump in there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Teri and Taylor Joe. This is, first off, I think really lovely for me to hear the larger theory of change connected together, from technology to the economy, and then from CA to the rest of the country, and then obviously to see to hear again the details on what's motivating CalCompute originally, and I think where that's going now. Let me lead off with a really quick question then, is on this sort of question of like, so go CA to the rest of the country. Do you see any sort of hints of this kind of play perhaps expanding to other states as well? Is there interest in this, or are you just really focused on right now in Cal?
Yes. So on the CalCompute side, I mean, as people know, Empire AI, so that would be the other story. So Governor Hochul, it was like a completely different approach. Governor Hochul was like, I'm going to do this, and then rounded up like 7 research institutions and allocated $400 million. And now I think an additional like 90 in this year's budget. And just like flipped the switch and made it happen. And they're already off to the races. So it's actually in some ways great that that's true, because as I was saying, like when we were having like the blank page problem, we were staring and going like, how do we create this thing? Empire AI was like a line in a press release, but then by the time we got, like much further along in the session, I was like, reading the Empire AI like authorizing statute and really trying to pull together what some of the parallels were. And then, as you know, Joshua, where we met was at the, the workshop we had last fall, where I was able to talk to some of the Empire AI folks and, learn a little bit more about how they had constructed their program. And so we now actually have like a live example to learn from, which I think is really great. But as I would say, the big difference is that the governor was really behind it there and allocated the money. So if Governor Newsom wanted to do such a thing, that would be fantastic. And he could, he could have a legacy on his hands too, which is to say, let's put a bunch of money into establishing public compute. So that is not in his current year budget. And I do not think, even though Senator Wiener is the chair of the budget committee on the Senate side, even the chair of the budget committee cannot just like snap their fingers and come up with $500 million. But, hope spring is eternal. And there is, the governor's last budget of his term will be next he'll start, that kicks off in January. So should this bill pass, which I think it will, I think that would be the time to have the conversation with the governor and see what kind of a legacy he's interested in.
Yeah, I'll say that on other pieces of work, we see quicker adoption on the part of states. I think it's not a coincidence that the two of the richest states in the country are the ones that are leading on some of this work. It's an extraordinarily expensive investment. And again, a certain kind of culture and idea around state capacity and as well. I think part of our theory of change is the power of models. A lot of the kind of the biggest, boldest policy moves throughout history, like a state tries it, figures it out, and then there's some sort of adaptation at the federal level. There are versions of public compute that already exist through the Department of Energy. We'll see where we are in 4 years, but I do think, but a lot of that is very focused in on a set of deliverables and research progress and innovations. I think part of the power of stuff like Cal Compute and Empire AI is again opening up access and thinking more expansively about the definition of public good and public benefit around the use of compute. And so our hope is that some of this modeling and the creation of these places in a way that I think might be quite challenging to see Louisiana, for example, replicate, you could, the hope is that we'll have federal adoption eventually.
Super interesting. Okay, let me first hand it to Dee, but before that, brief point of order. If folks have a question, please just raise your hand in Zoom, use the raise hand function. If you have a super relevant thing that needs to, will decrease in relevance over time, please both raise your hand and raise 2 fingers in the camera, so I know to sort of call you up first. And lastly, we do encourage, if you have the opportunity, to please turn on cameras that kind of help foster a more collegial feel. Has to be. Oh, and please introduce yourself when you first speak.
Hi, I'm Bea Cavello. I lead the emerging tech team at Aspen Digital, program of the Aspen Institute. And I had the great pleasure of meeting Taylor Joe. Gosh, I don't know now how long ago it was, a year and a half or maybe ago, at a convening on public AI. And full disclosure, I came into that convening be like, compute, who cares? Solve problem. No issue. And then I left the convening being like, holy cow, compute, this is really important. And I say that, and also over the last year or so, the heart is fickle. I don't know. I keep wavering in terms of is compute where it's at? I mean, I know that we had some major shakeups in kind of the public discourse around the release of the DeepSeek models and conversations around what does it really take to be a competitive player in this space? So I'm wondering, as you all have these conversations about making these really substantial investments in public compute and making these resources available to everyone, how do you field some of those questions around, like, is this a momentary bubble of like, yeah, compute really matters right now, or do you kind of yourselves ask these questions about what the ongoing role of compute will be?
Let me answer that a little bit quickly, which is one of the things that was the most striking as we were putting together Cal Compute was like having people from major research institutions in the state of California say like, yeah, not only do we not have enough compute to like develop a model, we don't even have enough compute to run an inference model. Like these major institutions, like flagship institutions. And that was very striking to me, that the need was really great. And then that was also true. We saw that also in the startup world. We met with some enterprising folks in San Francisco who were like buying up like little remainders of compute contracts and trying to like, sell them out to like others who might need small amounts of compute, because there just like isn't the kind of access that you'd want. And then one of them, and then another really striking conversation, an early one, was we met with a team from the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And I will say I was a little nervous about this conversation. I thought they were going to sort of poo-poo our idea and say like, we don't need this. We've got it handled. And it was exactly the opposite. They were like, this is a huge problem. We do not, like, there is not enough compute access for the kind of research and the kind of work that needs to be done. And then the other issue that they flagged, which I think is a really rich vein, is that the like workforce pipeline is also extremely it's just like a giant sucking sound over to the private sector. So here we are graduating like at Stanford, and I'm sure at our public institutions too, like 60% of the graduates from Stanford are computer science majors. And then where do they go? They all go to OpenAI, right? Like, and so like there's no, or Google, or, the list goes on. So there's very little opportunity to actually, fill our public sector with highly trained, computer science, machine learning, et cetera, because there's like those are not dynamic jobs and there's no place to go. So we're we're training up all these people and then just handing them over to private sector. And so we're just exacerbating the problem of this like concentration in the private sector and a very sort of atrophied public sector.
The only other thing I'd add on is that, the part of the importance part of like for us disaggregating what AI is to point to these different layers of the stack and to understand there's different market dynamics and realities for each layer. I would argue that there needs to be a lens around public, like what is the benefit to the public around each of these layers. So I think to some of the chat around the question, I think we're not in a great place if we're saying it's either data or compute. I think we need to have conversations about both and think about the intervention strategically for both. In the same way that I think, with the CHIPS Act, there is very much both a set of motivations there around national security, but there were also underlying competition questions as well. And again, the challenges of an oligarchy and/or monopoly within different layers of the stack. And so I think I think specific with compute, there is just really well-trodden territory now on establishing how people are getting locked into these contracts. They have trouble with access when they are in these contracts. The prices get rise in a way that startups and research institutions, which again are often going to be the drivers of both more dynamic markets and economic growth, and also the ones who are going to have an eye towards non-market interventions that benefit the public good, are having trouble getting what they need to get the job done. I think part of what I found really compelling about going further up the stack and focusing on that is that there's also neutrality to the technology, which I think, again, there was a lot of debates early on around, like, do you build a public model? And I think, B and I are in those conversations around, well, there's a lot of different directions the model could continue to go. There's like a dominant one right now with where OpenAI and Google and others are going. May not always be the case. And compute is a kind of a foundational infrastructural piece that, again, as the technology changes and shifts, will probably still be foundational, even if it maybe ebbs and flow in terms of access and need.
Melissa.
All right. Good morning, Teri and Taylor Joe. Thanks so much for being here. I was a Bay Area engineer tech person for a long time, then became a documentary filmmaker. I'm now doing a feature documentary about the nuns on the bus, rebel nuns fighting to save our democracy and create economic justice for all. So I thank you so much for, I'm also doing a lot of storytelling in the enterprise kind of corporate space about AI and how it's shifting culture and transforming operations and all that. But I'm so grateful that you laid out so clearly your kind of fundamental beliefs, the priors, that concentration of wealth and power is bad. And what was the other one? Markets can actually serve people and solve problems and not leave people behind. And I wonder what kind of pushback you get to that and how do you counter those arguments? I feel like, like somehow there's how do we sort of get to the gut level of believing that even those goals are the right goals?
Teri, why don't you go first, because you've had a very practical on the ground experience of this, of case making in the California legislature.
Yes. Well, first of all, I can't wait to see your documentary about nuns on the bus. And one of our colleagues loves the nuns on the bus. So that'll be very fun. So this is one of the things we take really seriously at ESP is like picking strategic fights and tapping into, and this goes a little bit back to the previous question too about like why compute. Is it like sort of tapping into what's resonant right now and not we do some other things where we're trying to make something resonant, but tapping into what's resonant, you're farther down the road. And so what we're seeing in California right now is that people aren't necessarily naming corporate concentration as like that's not the label they're using, but there's a lot of experience around feeling like the economy's rigged, feeling like like people are being screwed, feeling like somebody is somebody's getting rich, but it's not them. And so in a very real way, like there is like a lot of pent up frustration around the way the economy is working right now. And that, often like, it looks like my egg prices, right? Or like junk fees attached to my, concert tickets. But that is the same thing. And people are starting to like connect the dots. And so I do think that like at the public level, people are actually very much like, oh, wait, this affordability crisis that we're in, and the fact that all these prices just keep going up like mysteriously and for no apparent reason, like that is somebody pulling the strings behind the scenes. And that's not just like, oh, the market is, that's like that's like the cost of the market. And so we are actually seeing that. And that's something that we're actively engaged in, and we think the tech and AI space is very much that way. But which also then has prompted us to engage in some other legislative fights this year related specifically to what we're calling the tech-fueled price crisis. So we're co-sponsoring a bill around that would prohibit algorithmic price fixing, since there are these algorithms that all sort across every industry. RealPage is like the most famous, but it's happening everywhere, where there are these like pricing systems that are recommending prices and kind of like just like slowly but surely jacking them up. So we, I would say, like, to your bigger question, I think there is a real sense that the economy isn't working for people, and the people who it's not working for really feel it. And then it's like our job to kind of connect those dots and paint that as a systems problem, and then try to attack that system wherever we can.
Yeah. And Melissa, one thing I'll say to this is we talk a lot about how the importance of people talking about a sense of control in their lives right now, and then help them find the source of where they don't and why they don't feel that control, why they feel frustrated when prices keep going up, give them a root cause around that, I think is really powerful. I think part of where this connects also to the AI and why we, are thinking a lot about tech and AI too is, tech really has over the past decade accelerated people's sense of lack of control in their lives. Not all of that is economic. Social media plays a tremendous role in that. But I think we're potentially on the verge of that feeling even more exacerbated, depending on where we fall in the spectrum of what AI does to jobs. There is the fear in the water for people that they're not going to have the choices in front of them, not going to have avenues and pathways to building their version of the American dream. And the more that, again, we could equip people with a sense of agency to respond to that. And again, and that's why we use the language, a lot of tools around, like, these are tools, like anti-monopoly is a tool, antitrust is a tool, building government action is a tool, because tools are to be picked up by people and run with. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to instill with people is these are choices that we can make. And we as, as citizens, as people in this country can push on the choices that have been made so far and make a different set of choices that benefit us all. And I think that is an important part to like both help people understand the scale and scope of the problem, but also give them a sense of agency about what they can take back control in their lives.
It's so interesting because there's this human thing of like, things are complicated and out of control. I don't know, let the smart people, they're smarter than me about all this, just let them handle it. And that leads us towards this concentration of power. So I can see like there's legitimate like emotional argument for why that direction could be the right one. But thank you. But
yeah, and the last thing I'll say about this is people want a way forward. And I think things like Cal Compute give people a sense of like, we can build things again, we can build things that benefit us and create a sense of the common. And I think that's another thread that we see people really latch onto. Sorry, Teri, I didn't interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was going to say one other like felt sense thing that I'm seeing a lot more is this. I think tech did a really good job of saying like, well, it's not our fault that you let your children use, play video games, right? Like there's been a lot of like blame on the parent, on the person. And I think people are like, wait a minute, like, it was like, that's ridiculous. Like it was one thing, I was like, okay, fine, I could choose paper over plastic or something. But like, this idea that somehow I'm going to single-handedly like, swim upstream in this just torrent of stuff that's being thrown at me and forced at me, and I'm locked in and I can't help it. If I want to have a phone, I have to also agree to all these other things. Like, I think people have just had it and they've reached a point where like, that's just not true. And it's not fair to put it on individuals.
Hey everyone, it's great to be with you all today. Ziad Borat. I am joining from Los Angeles. So to all of us here, we definitely need to get out more and also meet each other. So I'm at the Mozilla Foundation. I'm a senior advisor to our leadership on strategic AI initiatives. So this includes working with creative communities and artists. So it's excited to see a bunch of you in the room with me today. And happy to talk a little bit more about that. But another project that I'm working on is compute in particular. So my team is looking at developmental compute outside of the US with other countries that are interested in kind of a sovereign AI stack. And so I'm curious, because I know you're very focused on California in particular, looking at models on a state-by-state basis in New York. But I'm curious about the international dimension of this and whether you've seen any resonances, whether you've shared best practices, both inwards or outwards, from folk in different countries as well, because that's something that we're actively working on. And just to give you an example, we're working on a developmental compute project in sub-Saharan Africa. We've been tracking with the Canadian government on their sovereign AI compute project as well. So there's a bunch on the go in the international dimension, and I'm curious how that feeds into your work in particular.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you're seeing also a spike on the sovereign piece of it, just given the broader geopolitical dynamic. So, what I would direct you towards is this paper that Vanderbilt Policy Accelerator did. So the workshop that we did in October of last year, we brought together, I think it was maybe 35 people, including folks who were representing some of the global efforts to build public AI. And so we had some folks from the UK represented there, some folks from France. I'm forgetting some of the other ones. But anyway, the goal was to kind of help level set on what do we know is happening globally. I think, again, part of our thesis is that here in the United States, we've often lacked the muscle around some of the ways that government can play an active role in shaping the direction of technology since we've been so hands-off for so long. So it felt really important to learn from the way that other countries were thinking about and approaching this with, kind of, again, different cultures around the relationships between government and private sector. So the paper that Ganesh worked on with his team, I think, is quite good at laying a taxonomy of what we have seen is happening globally. One of the things that I know that they said was it was quite hard because all of this is moving so fast and changing so fast, and the priors that people have is also evolving quite quickly. So that's part of the reason they ended up, instead of doing like a deep dive into every single, they did 10 case studies, but instead of doing a deep dive with every single one, they kind of try to pull up and say, like, what are actually the trends we're seeing across them? Because again, things were evolving quite quickly. So I think we're very focused on the United States as an organization. We think it's really important to be in a learning relationship globally. And I'm sure Ganesh and his team would love to kind of chat with you about what they learned and who they connected with across those different case studies, again, which range from Japan to UAE to Canada, et cetera.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I think the only last thing I'll say is that Teri can also share is there's a lot of like conversations in Sacramento with global actors as well. A lot of understanding this is not a nation's, like, there's a version of this problem and approach that is nation state, that is about sovereignty from the US tech companies for these other countries. And then there's the version of this, which is actually about technology has no borders. How do we solve this globally? How do we think about standards globally? So there's a lot of dialogue happening with global actors, which I know, Teri's experienced a bit in Sacramento.
Yeah, just to say, like, the UK has they roll deep in California. Like, the UK has, the consulate in California has like is very tightly watching and working with California and thinking and we're actually very similar. Like, the UK and California are like sort of similar in size, and like there's a lot of similarities. So there's a lot going on there.
Before I ask my question, I'm going to first invite everybody in the next 3 seconds to please unmute yourselves and join me in a raucous round of applause for Teri and Taylor Joe for joining us. So 3, 2, 1.
Yay!
Thank you guys very much.
Be here.
And now I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll jump to the spicy portion of the call.